Have you ever logged into Conquest of Azeroth, played for a few hours, and then wondered, why does it feel like everyone else is progressing faster than me? Maybe they're leveling quicker. Maybe they're making more gold. Maybe their class just seems stronger. And naturally, you start asking yourself, am I doing something wrong? The answer is, probably. But here's the good news. It's usually not because you're a bad player. Most people don't struggle because they lack skill. They struggle because they're making small mistakes over and over again without even realizing it. The kind of mistakes that don't seem like a big deal in the moment. But after 20, 30, or even 50 hours, those little mistakes add up. They cost you gold. They waste your time. They slow your leveling. And sometimes they make the game feel much harder than it actually is. That's what this video is about. Today, we're looking at everything you're probably doing wrong in Conquest of Azeroth. From leveling habits and talent choices to combat, exploration, and the mindset that quietly holds so many players back. If you recognize yourself in a few of these, don't worry. Most of us have made every single one. Let's start with one of the biggest mistakes of all. Mistake number 1, treating Conquest of Azeroth like retail WoW. This is the first trap almost every veteran World of Warcraft player falls into. You load into Conquest of Azeroth with years of experience. You've played retail, maybe Classic, perhaps Wrath or Cataclysm, so you naturally assume, I already know how this game works. But that's exactly where the problem begins. Conquest of Azeroth isn't simply another WoW server. It borrows the world you already know, but many of the systems, classes, and progression mechanics are designed with a different philosophy. If you approach every decision using retail habits, you're going to miss opportunities. You'll overlook mechanics. You'll misunderstand your class. And you'll probably wonder why things don't feel quite right. Instead of assuming everything works the same way, treat Conquest of Azeroth like a brand new RPG. Read your abilities. Experiment with talents. Take time to understand how your class is actually meant to play. The faster you let go of old habits, the faster you'll adapt. Speaking of adapting, here's another mistake that's surprisingly common. Mistake number 2, picking a class only because someone called it S tier. We've all watched tier lists. They're entertaining. They're useful. But they also create one huge problem. Players stop choosing the class they actually want to play. Instead, they choose whatever YouTube, Reddit, or Discord currently says is the strongest. Here's what usually happens. You create the class. Play for a few hours. Realize you don't actually enjoy the playstyle. Then re-roll. Now you've lost several hours of progress. Not because your class was weak, but because it wasn't fun for you. The strongest class on paper isn't always the strongest class in your hands. A class you enjoy will naturally motivate you to improve. You'll learn its mechanics. You'll understand its strengths. You'll spend more time playing it. That's almost always more valuable than chasing the latest tier list. Remember, balance changes. Enjoyment lasts much longer. Now let's talk about a mistake that's much more subtle, because most players don't even realize they're doing it. Mistake number 3, clicking through talents without reading them. I completely understand the temptation. You level up. A new talent becomes available. You click the one that looks strongest. Then you immediately continue questing. But here's the problem. Many talents in Conquest of Azeroth don't simply increase damage by a small percentage. They change how your abilities work. Some completely alter your rotation. Others improve survivability. Some make leveling easier. Others shine in group content. If you're choosing talents without understanding what they actually do, you're basically letting luck decide how your class plays. Take an extra minute. Read each option carefully. Think about how it fits your current playstyle. That small investment often makes combat feel dramatically smoother. Now here's something that quietly slows down thousands of players. Mistake number 4, fighting every enemy you see. This one took me embarrassingly long to realize. When you're traveling between objectives, it's incredibly easy to attack every enemy that crosses your path. After all, more enemies should mean more experience, right? Not necessarily. Sometimes those fights aren't helping you at all. They're simply delaying your actual objective. If an enemy isn't part of a quest, doesn't block your route, and doesn't provide something you specifically need, ask yourself whether it's worth stopping. The fastest leveling sessions usually have one thing in common: purpose. Every fight contributes toward a goal. That doesn't mean you should ignore everything around you. It simply means fighting with intention instead of habit. Now let's move away from combat for a moment. Because one of the biggest problems happens before players even leave town. Mistake number 5. Letting your inventory become a disaster. Everyone says inventory management is boring, and they're right. But ignoring it creates constant interruptions. Your bags fill up. You stop questing. You delete useful items. You accidentally sell crafting materials. You spend 5 minutes searching for something you know you picked up earlier. Those interruptions destroy momentum. One of the easiest ways to level faster is simply staying organized. Keep consumables together. Store crafting materials. Sell obvious junk regularly. Upgrade your bags whenever it makes sense. An organized inventory isn't exciting, but it quietly saves you hours over the life of your character. Here's another mistake that's surprisingly common among newer players. Mistake number 6. Saving every cooldown for the perfect moment. Have you ever finished a difficult fight, only to realize you never used your strongest abilities? You're not alone. Many players save cooldowns because they're worried they might need them later. The problem is, later often never comes. If an ability helps you finish difficult fights faster or survive dangerous situations, use it. Cooldowns exist to make your journey easier. They're not trophies to admire on your action bar. Of course, don't waste everything on the weakest enemy in the zone. But don't become so protective of your abilities that you never actually benefit from them. A cooldown used wisely is far more valuable than one that stays available forever. And finally, let's end this first part with a mistake that affects almost everyone at some point. Mistake number 7. Constantly wondering if you're playing correctly. This might be the biggest mental trap in the entire game. Every few minutes, you're comparing yourself to someone else. Another player levels faster. Someone has a different build. A YouTuber recommends another talent. Someone in chat says your class isn't the best. Suddenly, you're questioning every decision you've made. Should you reroll? Should you change your talents? Should you start over? Here's the reality. There isn't always one perfect answer. Conquest of Azeroth gives players room to experiment. That's part of what makes it enjoyable. If you're constantly chasing someone else's version of correct, you'll never actually learn your own class. Trust your experience. Keep improving. Adjust when necessary. But don't let every opinion convince you that you've been playing wrong the entire time. Confidence grows through practice, not through endlessly second-guessing yourself. Those were just the first 7 mistakes, and we've barely scratched the surface. In the next part, we're going to dive into the habits that quietly waste the most time. Things like poor quest routing, ignoring utility abilities, making costly gold decisions, and one mistake that almost every experienced MMO player still catches themselves making. Trust me, some of those are probably slowing your progress more than you realize. If you've recognized yourself in some of the mistakes we've already covered, don't worry. The truth is, almost every experienced player has made them too. The difference is that veteran players eventually notice these habits and correct them. That's what makes them seem like they're progressing so much faster. So let's keep going, because these next mistakes are some of the biggest hidden time wasters in the game. Mistake number 8. Running around without a plan. Have you ever logged in, accepted a bunch of quests, and just started running? No route, no plan, just following whatever objective looked closest. It feels productive, but it usually isn't. One of the biggest differences between new and experienced players isn't combat skill. It's planning. Experienced players spend a few moments looking at the map before they move. They notice that several quests take place in the same area. They avoid unnecessary backtracking. They finish multiple objectives before returning to town. That tiny bit of planning saves an incredible amount of travel time over the course of dozens of levels. Think of it this way. Every extra minute spent running is a minute you're not earning experience. You don't need to memorize perfect speed leveling routes. Just take 10 seconds before leaving a quest hub and ask yourself, what's the most efficient path? That one habit alone can make your leveling experience feel dramatically smoother. Now let's talk about something almost everyone ignores, until they realize how useful it actually is. Mistake number 9. Forgetting that utility abilities exist. When most players create a new character, they immediately focus on damage. Which abilities hit the hardest? Which talent gives the biggest numbers? Everything else gets ignored. Movement abilities, interrupts, crowd control, defensive skills, roots, slows. At first, that seems reasonable. After all, killing enemies quickly sounds like the fastest way to level. But in reality, utility abilities often save more time than damage abilities ever could. A well-timed interrupt prevents dangerous enemy casts. A movement skill gets you to your next objective faster. A stun can save you from pulling extra enemies. A defensive cooldown lets you survive situations that would otherwise end in a corpse run. The best players don't just use the abilities that deal damage. They use their entire toolkit. Every spell has a purpose. Learning when to use those abilities makes combat feel much easier. Speaking of combat, here's another mistake that's surprisingly common. Mistake number 10, fighting every battle the same way. One thing I noticed while watching experienced players is that they rarely approach every enemy identically. They adapt. If an enemy is weak, they finish it quickly. If another has dangerous abilities, they interrupt it. If a group looks risky, they change their positioning. Meanwhile, newer players often repeat the exact same rotation no matter what's happening. That's a habit worth breaking. Combat becomes much smoother once you start reacting to each situation instead of following the same sequence every single time. Adaptation is one of the biggest signs that you're improving. Now here's a mistake that costs players much more than they realize. Mistake number 11. Spending gold without thinking ahead. Gold always feels abundant, until suddenly it doesn't. One unnecessary purchase probably won't matter. Neither will the second, or the third, but eventually those little spending decisions start adding up. Buying gear you'll replace almost immediately. Paying for items you don't really need. Ignoring opportunities to save. Then later, when something genuinely useful appears, you can't afford it. The best habit you can develop is asking yourself one simple question before spending gold. Will this still matter several levels from now? If the answer is no, you might be better off saving your money. Think long-term instead of solving every small problem with gold. Now let's look at something that's much more psychological. Mistake number 12. Comparing your progress to everyone else. MMORPGs make comparison incredibly easy. You see higher-level players, better gear, faster mounts, more impressive achievements. Before long, you start feeling behind. But here's something worth remembering. You have no idea where those players started. Maybe it's their fourth character. Maybe they've been playing for months. Maybe they're following optimized routes they've already memorized. Comparing yourself to them doesn't actually tell you anything useful. Instead, compare yourself to yesterday. Are you dying less? Understanding your class better? Making smarter decisions? If the answer is yes, you're progressing exactly as you should. The only competition that really matters is becoming a better player than you were last week. Now here's one mistake that's incredibly easy to fix. Mistake number 13. Never reading what your abilities actually do. Let's be honest. Most players unlock new abilities, drag them onto their action bar, and immediately press them in combat. Sometimes they work exactly as expected. Sometimes they don't. Many abilities contain additional effects that players completely overlook. Maybe an attack generates resources. Maybe another ability resets a cooldown. Maybe one spell becomes dramatically stronger under certain conditions. Those little details often explain why your class feels awkward. Take a few minutes every so often to read through your abilities again. You'll be surprised how often you notice something you completely missed the first time. Understanding your toolkit almost always leads to smoother gameplay. And finally, here's a mistake that quietly ruins the experience for a lot of players. Mistake number 14. Treating leveling like a chore. It's easy to fall into this mindset. You convince yourself that the real game only starts at max level. Everything before that becomes something to rush through as quickly as possible. The problem is, Conquest of Azeroth clearly wasn't designed that way. The leveling journey teaches your class, introduces new mechanics, encourages exploration, rewards experimentation. If you spend the entire time wishing you were already finished, you're missing half the experience. Ironically, players who actually enjoy the leveling process usually perform better. They're less frustrated. They experiment more. They pay closer attention. And because of that, they naturally become stronger players. The journey isn't just something standing between you and the endgame. It's part of the game itself. We've now covered 14 mistakes that thousands of players make without even realizing it. But the final 6 mistakes are probably the most important. They're the habits that separate players who constantly struggle from the ones who seem to improve every single time they log in. And the last mistake on this list might be the biggest one of all. We've made it to the final part of the list. By now, you've probably noticed something. None of these mistakes are about having bad reflexes or being an unskilled player. They're habits. And the great thing about habits is that they can be changed. The final 6 mistakes are the ones that often separate players who constantly feel stuck from the players who seem to improve every week. Let's finish strong. Mistake number 15, ignoring what other players can teach you. One of the biggest advantages of playing an MMO is that you're surrounded by people who have already solved problems you're still figuring out. Yet many players never take advantage of that. They avoid asking questions. They ignore discussions. They never observe how experienced players approach the game. Sometimes the best lesson doesn't come from a guide. It comes from watching someone else handle a difficult situation. Maybe they pull enemies differently. Maybe they use an ability you've completely overlooked. Maybe their movement is cleaner or their positioning is smarter. You don't need to copy every single thing they do. But paying attention can save you hours of trial and error. The community is one of the greatest learning tools in Conquest of Azeroth. Use it. Now here's a mistake that's much more common than people like to admit. Mistake number 16. Changing your build every time you watch a new guide. This one happens all the time. You watch one YouTube video. It recommends a talent setup. The next day you read a forum post. It recommends something different. Then someone in Discord says both of those builds are outdated. Suddenly you're changing your talents again. Before long, you don't actually know how your class feels anymore because you're constantly starting over. Guides are useful. Community discussions are valuable. But remember that many builds are designed for different goals. Some prioritize leveling. Others focus on dungeons, PvP, or in-game content. A build isn't automatically bad just because someone else prefers another one. Instead of changing everything after every opinion, give yourself time to learn why your current build works. Experience is worth more than constantly chasing the newest recommendation. Here's another mistake that quietly steals hours from your progression. Mistake number 17, logging in without a goal. Have you ever logged into the game, stood in town for 15 minutes, checked your inventory, looked at the auction house, opened your talent tree, talked in chat, and then realized you hadn't actually done anything? We've all been there. Without a goal, it's easy to drift from one activity to another. Before you log in, decide what today's session is about. Maybe you're leveling. Maybe you're gathering materials. Maybe you're learning a dungeon. Maybe you're organizing your bank. One clear objective helps you stay focused and makes every session feel more productive. Even if you only have an hour to play, you'll accomplish much more when you know exactly what you're trying to achieve. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention. Mistake number 18, giving up too quickly on a class. One of the biggest misconceptions in Conquest of Azeroth is that if a class feels awkward during the first few levels, it must be a bad class. That's rarely true. Many classes evolve as you unlock more talents and abilities. A rotation that feels slow early on can become smooth and satisfying later. A mechanic that seems confusing at first often makes perfect sense after a few more levels. If you're constantly rerolling because every class feels imperfect in the beginning, you'll never reach the point where those classes truly come alive. That doesn't mean you should force yourself to play something you genuinely dislike. But it does mean giving your character enough time to develop before deciding it isn't for you. Sometimes the classes that feel the weakest early on become the most rewarding later. We're almost at the end. And this next mistake is one I think every MMO player has made at some point. Mistake number 19, believing there is only one right way to play. The internet loves finding the best class, the best talent build, the best leveling route, the best profession, the best strategy. But Conquest of Azeroth is at its best when players experiment. Different playstyles can work. Different talent choices can be effective. Different goals require different approaches. If you're constantly trying to play exactly like someone else, you're missing one of the most enjoyable parts of the game, discovering what works for you. Some of the strongest players aren't the ones who copied a guide perfectly. They're the ones who understood why a build worked and adapted it to their own style. Knowledge is far more valuable than imitation. And finally, the biggest mistake on this entire list, the one that quietly affects almost everything else. Mistake number 20, Forgetting that games are supposed to be fun. This might sound obvious, but it's surprisingly easy to forget. You start worrying about efficiency, experience per hour, gold per hour, the perfect build, the fastest route, the strongest class. Eventually, the game starts feeling more like work than entertainment. Here's something worth remembering. Very few players look back years later and remember their exact leveling speed. They remember the unexpected dungeon run that somehow worked out, the class they unexpectedly fell in love with, the friend they met while questing, the strange talent combination that somehow became their favorite, the moments that made them laugh, the mistakes that turned into great stories. Progress matters. Improvement matters. Learning matters. But don't become so focused on optimization that you forget why you started playing in the first place. Conquest of Azeroth is filled with opportunities to experiment, explore, and create your own adventure. Those experiences are worth far more than shaving a few minutes off your leveling time. So those were 20 things you're probably doing wrong in Conquest of Azeroth. The good news? Every single one of these mistakes is fixable. You don't need perfect mechanics. You don't need years of MMO experience. And you definitely don't need to know every talent, class, or dungeon by heart. Most improvements come from making small adjustments over time. Read your abilities. Plan your route. Use your full toolkit. Experiment with your class. Stay organized. And most importantly, enjoy the journey. Because the more you understand the game, the more rewarding it becomes. Now it's your turn. Which mistake have you been guilty of the most? Or maybe there's another common mistake that wasn't mentioned in this video. Share it in the comments. I read them all, and your advice might help another player avoid making the same mistake. If this video helped you, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more Conquest of Azeroth guides, beginner tips, class breakdowns, leveling strategies, and deep dives into everything this incredible game has to offer. Thanks for watching, enjoy your adventure through Azeroth, and I'll see you in the next video.